Galw'r aelodau I.
We call members to order, and the first item on our agenda this afternoon is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from Gareth Bennett.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the accessibility of trains for persons of reduced mobility?
Yes, by the 31st of December of next year, all trains must include provisions for people of reduced mobility in line with EU and UK government standards, and the procurement documents for the Wales and Borders Rail Services contract will mandate compliance with people of reduced mobility standards.
Thanks for that. We know that we are going to have a new train operator in Wales from next year. The problem is that the new operator may not be able to get new rolling stock for perhaps 4 years. So it could be that in order to comply with that legislation that you stated, we may have a tactic of the new train operator having to, or believing they have to leave toilets locked up on the trains, meaning that nobody can use them. Do you see that as a potential problem for the new franchisee?
No, under no circumstances will toilets be allowed to be locked.
Russell George.
First Minister, one of the frustrations for disabled passengers is that many trains only have a single wheelchair space, which is too often taken up by pushchairs or luggage. Now, I've been informed in Australia a whole carriage is dedicated to those passengers with reduced mobility, where there are additional spaces for wheelchair users. Can you outline a bit more detail on how the next rail franchise will cater for the needs of those with reduced mobility?
Well, we wouldn't want a situation where those people who are in wheelchairs are effectively segregated. And the member's not suggesting that, in fairness. It's hugely important that people are able to travel on all sections of the train. Coming back to the point I made earlier on, the technical specifications, as I said, will need to be complied with by the 31st of December next year. I can say that agreements are already in place to modify a significant proportion of the existing rolling stock, and plans are in place to deal with the pacer trains. Some of the existing fleet already meets the compliance requirements, but by the end of next year, all of them will have to.
Adam Price.
Yes, it would be grateful if the Minister could, the First Minister could just clarify. Has the Welsh Government requested in its specification from the bidders that all trains in the Metro will have toilet facilities which are compliant with the new rules on board?
What I can say is that we're considering a number of options at the moment. If the trains don't have toilets on board, then we would expect the operator to provide very much enhanced services at stations in order to ensure that people feel comfortable when they are travelling. There are, of course, examples of metro services elsewhere, such as Greater Manchester, where there are no toilets on board. And quite often there are no facilities for passengers who wish to use a toilet. That is not what we want. We want to make sure that people are able to access toilet facilities as easily as possible.
Rhiannon Passmore.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, Cabinet Secretary Ken Skates has been proactive in setting out the Welsh Government's ambitions for rolling stock fit for 21st century rail network. In July last year, Ken Skates stated, and I quote, "I've made no secret of the difficult in adding good quality rolling stock in Wales. And it's been absolutely clear that the next franchise, the Welsh Government's first, must have the passenger at its heart." First Minister, this commitment of the Welsh Labour Government can be evidenced by Wales being selected by CAF as the new location for its new centre of excellence for the manufacture of UK rolling stock. What opportunities, in the First Minister's opinion, will 30 million of investment and the creation of 300 high-calibre jobs in a facility that assembles, tests and commissions new railway vehicles afford the railway industry to ensure the accessibility of trains for persons of reduced mobility in Wales? Very much so.
This is one of the biggest public transport projects outside of London. It will utilise, of course, some of the existing lines that are already there. So they're all heavy rail at the moment. We'll need to see which will remain as heavy rail, which will be converted to light rail, which new routes would then be rolled out using light rail alongside some of the existing routes that have rail tracks on them but haven't been used for many, many years. These are all matters that are being considered as part of the franchise tendering process.
Question 2.
Question 2, Hefyd David.
What discussions has the Welsh Government had with the Cabinet for the Cardiff Capital Region with regard to a strategic development plan for South East Wales?
Well, ministers and officials have met representatives from the Cardiff Capital Region Cabinet several times since October 2015 to promote preparation of a strategic development plan for the south east of Wales. The next step now is the Cabinet must identify a responsible authority so formal preparation of the plan for the region can begin.
On the 27th of April, the elected representatives of the Cardiff Capital Region wrote to the Cabinet Secretary for Energy, Planning and Rural Affairs, in which they said they firmly believe the best opportunity to deliver positive planning outcomes and deliver the transformational change is to prepare a strategic development plan for the region that is genuinely a regional plan based on regional evidence, rather than a plan that simply knits together existing local development plans. They added, if the Welsh Government continues to force all 7 local planning authorities with a 2021 plan expiry date to review their LDPs, there will not be sufficient resource within the region to progress the SDP, and this opportunity will be lost for many years. Basically, what they're saying is that we need to move ahead with the strategic development plan. We can't then review LDPs in the depth that the government wants with those resources. There's a choice to be made, and I urge the government to back a strategic development plan for South East Wales.
Well, first of all, we want to see a strategic development plan, but it's hugely important that there are LDPs in place, because if LDPs run past their expiry date, if I can put it that way, then of course you get uncontrolled, often you can get uncontrolled development, because applications will come in the absence of a development plan. We want to see a strategic development plan, but the ball is in the court of the region. They must identify a responsible authority now, and then of course we can commence the process. We want to work with them to develop a strategic development plan that is by far the most sensible approach, and he's said it himself in this chamber. But it is important now that they do identify which authority is going to be responsible for its development.
Ahmed Ashkar.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. First Minister, any plan to secure the maximum economic benefit from the Cardiff Capital Region must include a relief road for the M4. I have been contacted by a number of business owners who have expressed their dismay that Cabinet Secretary for Finance and your potential successor recently appeared to pour cold water on the proposed black route. As one business owner said, and the quote is, "This is not a picture of Wales open for business," quote close. First Minister, in your government discussion with the Cardiff Capital Region Cabinet, have you and will you continue to commit to building a relief road for the M4 in or around Newport, please?
Well, first of all, I think it's only fair to point out the context in which the comments were made by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance. He was saying quite properly that the cost is clearly an issue. Of course it is. He will not be acting in his role as Cabinet Secretary for Finance if he didn't point that out. And that is an issue. So the only issue, of course, that will need to be considered. Now, just to remind members that what will happen is that when the Planning Inspector's report is received, expect the summer or the early autumn, that will be the time to give consideration to that report. And a decision will then be taken as to which route is the way ahead. What we do know is that the congestion will not improve in the Bringlass Tunnel. That much is to me obvious. But I have to keep an open mind on which route should be taken forward, because I'll be the person taking the decision. And so when the Inspector's report arrives on my desk, that and any other relevant considerations will form part of my thinking.
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Davies.
Presiding Officer. First Minister, last week we had the report into Tawelfan up in North Wales, and many members have had the weekend to digest the contents of that report. One of the startling conclusions of the report was the mishandling of the creation of Betsy as a health board for North Wales. It talked of lines of accountability were impossible to track, a rift between the health board and the ward into how to deal with patient safety. Clinical policy was seriously flawed, and senior nurse leaders were disrespected and ignored. All that was the language that was in the report on their thoughts about the creation of Betsy as a health board for North Wales. You were a minister in the government that made the reorganisation of the health service in 2009 a possibility, and you've been First Minister for the duration of that health board's existence up in North Wales. Do you now not regret the way that that reorganisation was undertaken in North Wales that has led to such observations, and indeed can directly be correlated to some of the findings of the mistreatment on the Tawelfan ward?
Well, first of all, it's clear the report contains findings that will need to be acted on. It's far from a whitewash, as was described by one member of his party. It's a report that does identify many of the difficulties that are rightly there for all to see and will need to be acted upon. I don't believe that in principle the reorganisation of the health service at that time was a bad idea. We haven't seen similar situations occurring elsewhere, but it is clear that as far as Betsy is concerned, they will need to act on the report's findings, and as a government we will support them in order to deliver what the people of the north of Wales would expect to see in terms of rectifying what has been found to be wanting in this report.
First Minister, I appreciate your answer, but really these findings in the report point clearly to that reorganisation as being the starting point of many of the problems accumulated in the events on the Tawl Van ward. I have asked you, have you any regrets about that reorganisation? And if you had your time again, would you do that reorganisation differently? When you have such a report that talks about accountability being impossible to track, when you have a rift between the health board and the ward, when you have seriously flawed clinical policy, and when senior nurse leaders were disrespected and ignored because of the process that you politically, as a government, put in place at that time, then surely on reflection, you can reflect on the point that all measures were not taken in the right manner to put a health board in place to deliver a first-class health service in North Wales. And is it not now incumbent on the government to actually start delivering that first-class health service for North Wales?
First of all, I don't accept that it was because of reorganisation it was a major cause in terms of what happened at Tawl Van. It was obviously part of it. If that were the case, then we would see problems with reorganisation across Wales, and indeed in other wards and other hospitals across North Wales as well. That it is a factor, it's something to consider. Now, people will want to know what happens next, because the report is there, it needs to be acted upon. Well, the recommendations are clear. The Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Services will be making a statement later on this afternoon, explaining to members what future plans are. But it's important, of course, that the plan is acted upon. That's what we intend to do as a government.
I regret that you couldn't identify the flaws that the report identified as being at the heart of the reorganisation that happened in 2009. The language that I used was directly taken from the report, and obviously that is what the investigations have unearthed. But moving on, First Minister, the Health Board has now been in special measures for 3 years, or nearly 3 years, shall I say. In an interview you gave to the BBC some 2 weeks ago, you said that there was no unfinished business left now that your term of First Minister was coming to a close. We could debate that across this chamber, and we most probably wouldn't move much further forward. But one thing certainly residents in North Wales would appreciate an understanding of, given that you think that there's no unfinished business, surely one of the items of business that needs to be addressed is the normalisation of the structures that Betsy operates under rather than direct government control. So do you believe that by the time you step down as First Minister, Betsy will be out of special measures come December of this year?
Well, I suppose there'll always be things that are that will need to continue to be proceeded with when you leave office. That's inevitable. But for me, what's important is that people continue to see a continued improvement in health service across the north of Wales. I've never been prepared to put a time limit on when Betsy should come out of special measures. It will remain as special measures for as long as is necessary to ensure continuous improvement. How long that will be will depend, of course, on us being satisfied that there is sufficient progress to enable us to release Betsy from special measures. That's not the case at the moment. I don't think it would be wise to put a particular date on that.
Leader of the UKIP group, Neil Hamilton.
The Welsh Government remains committed to the universal adoption of the Welsh Baccalaureate, but the elite universities don't seem to be terribly interested in it as a qualification. Indeed, the top 3 universities don't require it at all. I've been written to by a school student who says that the Welsh Bac is a burden for students and teachers alike, and the work is tedious and not useful for more able students. Because these 2 subjects are compulsory for Year 9s, it'll be very difficult to compete with English pupils for jobs and university places, as they'll have done 2 more valuable subjects. So, in the circumstances, does the First Minister not see that this is, at best, a distraction from more useful use of time in schools?
Well, it's not correct to say that the Welsh Bac is not recognised by the top universities, as he put it. People do recognise it for the breadth it gives to the skills that students are able to acquire when they're in school. Now, my son is in school. I've seen the work that he does via the Welsh Bac, and I have to say, both he and I find it extremely useful, because it takes him beyond looking at just academic subjects and enables him to develop more as an individual and therefore have a more rounded education. And I believe that students, whatever level that they leave full-time education, are more employable as a result of the skills that the Welsh Bac gives them.
It's a debatable point in itself, I believe. It's not one I'm going to pursue at this minute. But to take the wider point that the First Minister has raised, yes, I do agree that the Welsh Baccalaureate course might have some use beyond formal learning in classrooms, making students think about wider issues in the world. That in itself could be a good thing. Depends on how the course is structured and how it is taught. One of the things which the Welsh Bac contains is a global citizen challenge, which deals with issues such as cultural diversity, fair trade, future energy, inequality and poverty. These are all highly political topics which need to be taught in a balanced way if education is not to degrade itself into mere propaganda. There are serious debates, for example, about the causes of poverty in other parts of the world. You know, why is a potentially rich country like Venezuela reduced to destitution? We know that's because it has a Corbynite government. Why is a country like Singapore, which has virtually no natural resources, now the country in the world which has the highest per capita income? None of this features in the Welsh Baccalaureate course on poverty. So does the First Minister not agree with me that we need to be very careful about the way these political subjects are taught in schools to make sure that the course is balanced and it teaches students how to think critically about issues rather than just to swallow what they're told?
I trust our teachers, bluntly, and I also trust our students to be able to think critically for themselves. There are education systems that, if you look at PISA, perform better on the figures than ours, but I'm not sure they necessarily give students the ability to think critically. They can pass exams, but that's not the same as being prepared for the world of work or to think about the world around them. I mean, the issues that he has identified there are surely issues that concern us all. Will there be different views on how to address inequality, different views on how to address poverty? Nevertheless, they are hugely important issues that I think every young person needs to think about. But I've seen no examples at all of any kind of bias being introduced into the curriculum. And from my perspective, I think it's hugely important that our students do have the ability to go beyond academic subjects, but I think it makes them more rounded individuals when they do think more critically and more widely.
Well, all I can say is, having looked at the various materials which are used in teaching these courses, they're all from a centre-left disposition. Now, we can all differ. Well, matter of fact, and I think the false indignation coming from the other side proves the point I'm trying to make here, that because they control the education system, it is being used as a tool of propaganda. There is nothing, for example, in the topic of wind energy, which calls into question the efficacy of this, even to deal with the problems of man-made global warming, if that is held to be a problem. So what I'm saying to the First Minister is that parents should be very worried. And yes, the First Minister has said he trusts teachers. And of course, I'm not saying that teachers set out in order to propagandise children. But the mindset of a teacher is very important as a background to this. And considering that 72% of 70 secondary school teachers, according to the Times Educational Supplement, vote Labour, 10% vote Liberal, only 8% vote Conservative, that of course is a highly unrepresentative sample of the population as a whole. And therefore, even if bias is subconscious, it must be regarded as a potential danger.
You do wonder. Well, it's quite clear why teachers are reluctant to vote UKIP then, given what they've just heard. I mean, I do wonder, listening to the leader of UKIP, whether he regards, from his perspective, George W. Bush as a dangerous communist. Because was he somebody, for example, who backed Section 28 of the Local Government Act? and the demonising of gay and lesbian people as a result of that. Well, if he did, and I think I'm right in saying that he did do exactly that, then yes, anything is centre-left from his perspective. From our perspective, we want to make sure that young people get a balanced view of the world, and not a view that says, for example, well, man-made, as he put it, global warming, if such a thing exists. The vast weight of evidence supports that. The fact that a few people choose to say it differently doesn't mean that proper weight should be given to their evidence, because there are so few of them. If he is really saying that the point of teaching young people through the Welsh Bac information about energy, for example, is to ignore the full weight of science, then that gives us some idea of what he would like to be taught in our schools. We prefer balance. He wants right-wing revisionism.
Arweinydd
Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood.
Llywydd, the EU withdrawal bill, as amended, will still allow the Assembly's competence to be restricted without its consent, and the intergovernmental agreement does not provide watertight assurance that this will not happen. Does the First Minister agree or disagree with that statement?
I disagree with the way that it's been put, because I think we've come a long way from where the UK government were. They have given a lot of ground. It's not ideal from our perspective, of course not, but the nature of an agreement is that you come to ground that you believe to be common ground. What the agreement says is that the UK government will not normally legislate in devolved areas. That simply reflects what's already said in the devolved settlements across the UK. It is something I think which will need to be addressed in the future, but I believe we have an agreement that shows that a lot of ground has been given by the UK government, particularly the introduction, effectively, of the Sewell Convention into secondary legislation, something that didn't exist in the same way before, and I believe it gives us the protection that we need. We will, of course, be very vigilant in making sure that the UK government keeps to the terms of the agreement.
The words in that statement, First Minister, were not my words. They were taken from an analysis by the National Assembly for Wales's legal team, which confirms the damning repercussions of the dodgy deal between the Tories in Westminster and your Labour government. Last week, Labour frontbench members claimed that Plaid Cymru didn't understand the outcome of this deal when it came to the powers of this Assembly and its ability to withhold consent. First Minister, the legal advice shows the opposite to be true. The advice says any indication that this Assembly will be able to block Westminster by withholding consent is, and I quote, misleading. It goes on to say, and I quote again, the Assembly's competence can be restricted without its consent. Does the First Minister agree with the Assembly's lawyers that Westminster can now meddle in our Assembly and there is absolutely nothing we can do about it?
Well, this is the way she presents it. This has been the case since 1999. It's not new. The reality is that it's always been the case, both in Scotland and in Wales, that the UK Parliament would not normally legislate in devolved areas, but it's always been able to do it because of the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. The agreement's not going to change that. Now, in the future, I agree there needs to be a debate about whether parliamentary sovereignty is appropriate, and I've said it before publicly, for the future. And I think we do need to move to a constitutional settlement that recognises that there are different centres of democratic legitimacy within the UK itself. But as far as the current devolution settlement is concerned, we now have a situation where, in effect, there will be a very high political cost for any UK government to pay if it wished just to ram through whatever it wanted to. And can I say as well, if it was the case that the UK government wanted to ignore completely the Assembly or Scottish Parliament, it would have done so already. It hasn't done so. It came, not for me to defend it, I don't do it often, but in reality, the UK government has come to an agreement where they have conceded, I reckon, a great deal of ground. And we are in a position where, whilst we would prefer to get rid of Clause 11 completely, we are in a position where safeguards, sufficient safeguards, have been put into Clause 11. A level playing field has been created in terms of the making of legislation that we were nowhere close to a year ago. And I certainly pay tribute to my colleague Mark Drayford for the work that he did on a week-to-week basis in coming to the agreement that we did.
Minister, this is a dodgy deal and it's one that you have signed up to. And it's not simply created constitutional chaos. Your decision to give this bill consent will have ramifications for our economy as well.
Whilst your party is all over the place on this question, your ministers and Labour members continue to campaign for membership of a customs union. By advising that we consent to the withdrawal bill, however, you are serving up a hard Brexit to the Tories on a plate. Will the First Minister confirm that he understands that by consenting to the withdrawal bill, he is ensuring that it is Westminster that will decide whether Wales leaves the customs union and the single market?
Well, it was always the case that in law, which Westminster decides whether you leave the customs union, in reality, as you have heard me say many, many times, that would be madness as far as the UK is concerned. It is hugely important that the UK remains within the customs union. Trade policy is not devolved. That is reality. But we have ensured that we have a voice to make sure that the voice of Wales is heard. Now, I have to say, last week, I listened to Plaid Cymru last week. It was almost as if there were two different debates. I listened to Dyma'r and what he said. A measured, detailed response. It was a measured, detailed response compared to what we had before from the leader of Plaid Cymru, where she used words like capitulation, betrayal, dodgy deal. She sounds like Jacob Rees-Mogg when talking about Brexit. I don't mind criticism, but at least let's look at the detail. Let's look at the detail. Let's look at the detail. If there are disagreements on the detail, fine. But in the answers that I gave, not once did she come back to me and say, well, look, what about this? What about this? How does that provide us with reassurance? I have to say that I thought the answer that was given by, or the speech that was given by Dyma'r certainly last week was measured and something I thought on which we could have a proper debate.
Question 3, Adam.
Question 3, Adam Price. Will the First Minister make a statement on the availability of out-of-hours doctors in the Hywel Dda University Health Board area?
I expect Hywel Dda University Health Board to provide a range of safe and effective services out of hours to respond to urgent healthcare needs of their population when GP surgeries are closed.
Well, perhaps the Welsh Government expect them to do that, but on a number of occasions this year, patients within Hywel Dda have been left without out-of-hours cover on weekends because of what the Health Board itself describes as a shortage of GPs, a dire shortage of GPs. It affects the 3 counties within their area, but it's specifically having an impact on Carmarthenshire because of particular problems at Glangwili and Prince Philip hospitals. Now, the Health Board itself has apologised to patients on a number of occasions. Is the Welsh Government going to apologise too? Because you decided not to include Carmarthenshire in the work-life training programme to attract GPs to Carmarthenshire. Doesn't some of the responsibility fall on your shoulders?
What we wish to ensure, of course, is that people do come to work in Wales, and we've seen the numbers increasing because of that. For example, the numbers in Cadeirio'r and in Pembrokeshire, for example, in 2016, hundreds of doctors came in to the training place. In 2016, the percentage was 0, and then it increased to 100 in 2016. And the reason you say that some services have not been sustained, and that is correct. So what's next? Well, Hywel Dda is employing advanced paramedic practitioners, people who can work within the local area, and adverts have been placed by the Health Board seeking to attract people into the Hywel Dda area, and there is discussion ongoing at present on the potential of developing regional working, particularly during the night hours, and that discussion includes ABMU Hywel Dda, and also and we're also looking at GPs working from home. That has been considered at present, and of course that will need to be considered to see how effective that is. And so, yes, it's true to say that the service had not been of the quality that we would expect, but the Health Board is working on resolving the situation.
Thank you, Llywydd. First Minister, there's clearly a huge problem in terms of out-of-hours doctors in the Hywel Dda University Health Board area, and one of the impacts of this is to place significant pressures on A&E services, for example. Now, the options for the Health Board's current consultations mean that Withybush Hospital will be downgraded to a community hospital without A&E services, which is entirely unacceptable. Would you agree with me, therefore, that it's even more important that A&E services should be available to people in Pembrokeshire, given that there is a huge problem with out-of-hours doctors, and that the Hywel Dda Health Board should at least recognise this in its consultation on reconfiguring health services in the West of Wales?
Well, I cannot express a view on the consultation, of course. It's important that this takes place and that it's an open consultation and that people have the opportunity to express their view on the process itself and to say how strongly they feel about any issue. As regards Pembrokeshire, there are 6 GPs that are additional 6 GPs being trained in Pembrokeshire, and that of course will be of assistance and help to the area. And also there's an additional 6 doctors on the hospital rota in the local area, because those doctors will also have a role to play in the hospital itself. So we have succeeded in attracting doctors to the Ceredigion and Northern Pembrokeshire area, and we would expect, however, to continue to attract more doctors in order to ensure that there is sufficient number of doctors available out of hours.
Question 4, Lynn Neagle.
Does the Minister make a statement on support for care leavers?
Well, supporting care leavers into independent adulthood and successful futures is a key commitment in prosperity for all. And through the Ministerial Advisory Group and investment in key initiatives, a strong collaborative approach will improve outcomes for those involved, and we're beginning to see the beneficial effects of what has already been announced.
Thank you, First Minister. And I'm very proud that despite the challenges of austerity, Torfaen Council became the first local authority in Wales to exempt care leavers from paying council tax until 21 or 25 in some circumstances. And as you'll be aware, that decision was followed by 6 other local authorities. This exemption will provide care leavers with a vital opportunity to transition and adapt to independent living, and this peace of mind should be available to all care leavers in Wales, not just in the 7 local authorities who've introduced the policy. First Minister, what can you do to assist the remaining local authorities in Wales to provide this exemption to care leavers, to ensure that care leavers in Wales can access this support wherever they live?
Well, learn from the good example of others, is what I would say. We've already asked local authorities to use their powers to exempt care leavers from paying council tax. I would not think it's a massive financial hit on the budgets of local authorities. I very much welcome what Torfaen has done, and the other local authorities. I very much urge the others to follow suit.
Jonathan Saunders.
And it's a really good question that's been asked here today. Because of the 7 local authorities that have already introduced this, the actual cost would across Wales would cost £2 million. 60 local authorities in England have implemented this, and in October it was announced for all care leavers in Scotland. So, First Minister, what commitment will you make to providing funding to local authorities here in Wales to provide a 100% council tax exemption for young care leavers?
Well, some local authorities have done it already. Now, because they've done it already, I can't see why others cannot follow suit. I believe there's now 8 rather than 7 across Wales who have exempted care leavers from paying council tax until at least the age of 21. 2 local authorities have exempted all care leavers up to the age of 25. And 3 have exempted up to the age of 25 in certain cases. Now, I understand that a further 10 local authorities have plans to move ahead with this, subject to necessary approvals. We haven't had information back from 4 local authorities, but we will continue to press. If one local authority can do it, the others can do it. And so I would very much urge the other local authorities to follow the good example of those who have already committed to this policy.
Caroline Jones.
Llywydd. First Minister, the best support we can give to care leavers is ensuring that they have the knowledge and skills needed to prepare them for an independent adult life. The skills most of us are taught by our parents. What is the Welsh Government doing to ensure that corporate parents equip those in care with the skills needed in later life? And will you learn from the Roots Foundation in my region, who focus on helping those in care transition to independent living?
Well, I think our carers, our foster carers particularly, do an incredible job. I've met people who have fostered many, many children, and they've fostered children who come to them in the most difficult of circumstances, sometimes more than once. And I've seen foster carers who foster children at a very young age, who then, of course, see them go for adoption when they're 18 months, 2 years old. It's very, very emotionally difficult for people. I really take my hat off to them. See, that's what we have done as a government. Well, we've established the £1 million St David's Day Fund that supports care leavers to access opportunities in education, training and employment. There's £625,000 for local authorities to develop apprenticeship and traineeship opportunities within the local authority, acting as good corporate parents. And £1 million has been provided to local authorities so that personal advisor support can be provided for all care leavers up to the age of 25. Those are just some examples of what we have done as a government in order to provide the sort of funds that are required to give our care leavers a better start in life.
Question 5, Jane Bryan.
Question 5, Jane Bryan.
An update on the impact of the Help to Buy Wales scheme.
Well, since its launch in 2014, Help to Buy Wales has helped nearly 6,900 households to buy their new home, with around 75% being first-time buyers. And in addition, of course, the scheme is attracting development funding into Wales and providing jobs and opportunities for the Welsh supply chain.
Thank you, First Minister. The value of homes in Newport has grown by 4.7% in the last year, with the average house price now in Newport over £185,000. The Welsh Government's Help to Buy scheme has helped over 1,200 first-time buyers to purchase their homes in Newport, and that's 1/5 of all Help to Buy homes purchased in Wales. With the removal of the 7 bridge tolls fast approaching, people moving from Bristol and Cardiff to Newport, increasing rents and house prices continue to put a real strain on young people and families. Consequently, there's a real risk of young first-time buyers being priced out of the market. What more can the Welsh Government do with the local authority and social landlords and developers to ensure property hotspots like Newport are attainable for those who want to get on the housing ladder for the first time?
Well, Help to Buy Wales is part of that, but other schemes such as renting to own are hugely important. Also making sure, of course, there's sufficient supply of housing in the area. That's not just about building more and more homes, although we have our target of 20,000 homes that we will reach by the end of this Assembly term, but also, of course, bringing more empty homes into use. And Newport, of course, has a good record of doing that. And, of course, looking at alternative ways, such as shared equity schemes, such as community land trusts, in order to make housing more affordable and particularly to make sure that the price of housing doesn't go up so fast and so far that housing then becomes unaffordable. One way of doing that is through shared equity. One way of doing that is through community land trust, where the land is owned by a landlord and people who own houses on the land are leaseholders. It helps to control the price of houses. And I think all these things can be looked at by house builders in order to make sure that more and more houses become available.
David Melding.
First Minister, I certainly agree with you that the Help to Buy scheme has been successful as it has been in England, and the other demand-side measures that you mentioned, most of them are also in England, have also been helpful. But they're not as powerful as supply-side measures. Can I tell you now, the latest figures, March 2018, just gone, the average house price in Wales is now over £181,000. That's between 6 and 7 times average income. That's why we have a housing crisis. It's not your fault in particular. It's all of us who've been active in politics for the last 25, 30 years. And we've got to have a complete change starting on the supply side.
I agree, but I think it's about more than that. The most difficult part of the housing market in the UK is that people have become used over many, many years to seeing a house as an asset, as something that potentially could be something that they could potentially see an increase in their financial investment or something for their children. It doesn't happen everywhere else in other countries, where quite often in some countries renting is seen as the norm and property isn't seen as something you invest in. But it is in reality the case that people do invest in houses with the expectation that prices will go up. The question is getting the balance right. Prices will go up, but making sure they don't go up at an astronomical rate. And that means increasing the supply. He's quite right about that. But making sure that the supply properly matches the demand that's there. There's no point increasing the supply of high-end housing if the market isn't going to help those people who are at the lowest end of the income scale, which is why I've always emphasised the fact that, yes, we need social housing. Yes, we need to make sure that there is more good private rented accommodation. Yes, we need more houses for purchase, but we also need to look at other ways in which people can get a stake in property without having to buy a house outright, which would be beyond them financially.
Question 6, Vicky.
Question 6, Vicky Howell.
What action is the Welsh Government taking to support economic growth in the Cynon Valley?
Well, the Prosperity for All National Strategy and the Economic Action Plan sets out the actions we're taking to support economic growth in the Cynon Valley and across Wales. Just some examples, of course. Our Vibrant and Viable Places Town Centre Loans Fund is helping to support town centre regeneration across Wales, Aberdeen in particular, seeing the benefit of that. If we look, for example, at the Cynon Valley has attracted 4 investments from foreign-owned companies and 2 investments from elsewhere in the UK over the past 5 years. And, of course, there are examples of homegrown businesses in the valley that are doing well, such as Ashwood Designs.
Thank you, First Minister, and I agree with everything you said there. I recently visited Pontus Research, which is an award-winning agriculture R&D business in my constituency with a global client list. The company has done incredibly well, but they've now reached capacity and they need to grow. They've applied for funding from the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, but have been told that their application could take at least 120 days, that's 120 working days, just to process. This is preventing them from developing, from possibly securing match funding, from taking on new staff, and thereby contributing to economic growth even further in my constituency. First Minister, will you look at how the EMFF is working in Wales to see whether improvements can be made to timescales so that other businesses like Pontus don't lose out?
Well, first of all, the appraisal process should take up to 120 working days, not at least 120 working days. What I can say, though, in relation to Pontus, is the application is currently being appraised. The company has received a letter confirming that they can start work at their own risk from the point the application is submitted. That was in January 2018, in order for that work to begin. I can also say the company has been able to benefit as well from funding made available by the Welsh Government through the Fisheries Business Development Advisors Scheme to help to pay a consultant to develop the business idea. But if your constituent has been told that it's at least 120 days, let me give the assurance it is up to, with the objective, of course, that the appraisal process is finished long before that.
David Melding.
Diolch yn fawr, Clywed. Obviously, with good books this afternoon. Long way to continue. First Minister, Cynon Valley is the 3rd least economically active constituency in Wales, and we know the association between economic activity and prosperity. And the main reason that people remain economically inactive when they could actually, for health reasons, it would be fit enough for work, is they don't have the basic skills to enter the job market as it changes rapidly. And therefore, investment in basic skills is as important as driving towards the great knowledge-based economy, which, of course, we also want to see in Wales. And these programmes are what we really need in areas like Cynon Valley.
I agree. The reason why, of course, productivity is historically low, not just in Wales but the rest of the UK, is over many years there was a lack of investment in skills development. And we know that if people have, the more skilled people are, the more productive they are, the more they can earn. I've said this before in the Chamber. Why is it that you give a German worker a particular machine and they will get far more out of it than a worker in the UK? Why? Training. That's the reason for it, and that's a lesson we must learn. How are we doing it? Working with higher education bodies who are working hard in their communities. FE colleges, we have new colleges that have been built across Wales, offering fantastic facilities for local people. And the Valley's task force has at its very heart the desire to ensure that people can have better jobs closer to home, and that means, of course, making sure that they have access to the skills that they need. But it is hugely important as well to make sure that jobs don't leave Valley communities, and that's why I was so disappointed to see that the DWP have decided to centralise lots of jobs that have come from other valleys intra-forest. They're not new jobs, they're jobs that have simply been moved around, and unfortunately for many people that will mean that they will now find they have to travel further in order to keep the jobs that they have. That is the wrong direction.
Saith Jane Hutt.
And 7 Jane Hutt.
To respond to the call from Ovarian Cancer Action for a national clinical audit of ovarian cancer in Wales.
Well, the clinical audit and outcome review programme for the NHS doesn't include a provision, that's true, for a national clinical audit of ovarian cancer services. We do, however, encourage ovarian cancer charities in Wales to approach the Wales Cancer Network to consider alternative approaches for reviewing services.
Thank you, First Minister. You'll be aware that today, in fact, is World Ovarian Cancer Day, and on Mother's Day, I joined hundreds of others in a walk in memory of Leslie Woolcock from Barry, who was a tireless campaigner on ovarian cancer, sadly passed away in 2016. According to Ovarian Cancer Action, ovarian cancer is the UK's deadliest gynecological cancer, and the UK has one of the lowest survival rates in Western Europe. So an ovarian cancer audit could provide the data to help find out why this is and where the challenges lie. And of course, recognising the importance of national clinical audits, and they have improved survival rates in lung, bowel and head and neck cancers. I understand Scotland has just completed an ovarian cancer audit, and Chief Medical Officer in England has called for an audit. So I hope indeed there will be consideration for an audit for women in Wales.
Well, there already exist clinical audits for a number of other cancers, as the member already pointed out. We keep an open mind on whether clinical audits are appropriate for all cancers, but what I can say is that there is already a system in place in order to examine the way in which ovarian cancer is detected and indeed treated. That's part of the approach set out in the Cancer Delivery Plan for Wales. We do have a significant amount of data on ovarian cancer that's provided by the Wales Cancer Registry, and we do learn from that in terms of what impacts cancer survival through our participation, for example, in international studies. I can also assure members that ovarian cancer services are subject to a peer review programme that has taken place this year, and that is intended, of course, to support quality improvements in services.
Ac yn ola cwestiwn 8.
And finally, question 8, Llywydd Griffith. Will the First Minister make a statement on the procurement of health services in North Wales?
All procurement by any health board should be undertaken in accordance with its standing financial instructions. The principles of financial management set out in managing Welsh public money, and with the specialist advice and support of the National Health Service Wales Shared Services Partnership procurement services to assure compliance and value for money.
In response to questions from Plaid Cymru on proposals to privatise dialysis services in North Wales, you said on the 30th of January that you were entirely opposed to privatisation.
Against privatisation, meddech chi.
Those were your words. We now hear that Betty Cadwaladr is proceeding with plans to privatise those dialysis services across North Wales. The staff tell me that they don't want to transfer from the NHS into the private sector, and they also tell me that they don't feel there's been sufficient consultation with them. There certainly hasn't been consultation with patients or the public more generally. And I have a letter from the Health Board confirming that they have your government's support for this proposal. The Labour government allowing public services to transfer from the NHS into the private sector. Now, it's something that you are very critical of when the Conservatives do it in England. So when you told us on the 30th of January that you were entirely opposed to privatisation, did that suggest that you didn't know what was happening within the health service in North Wales, or indeed were you trying to mislead us?
No, not at all, and I would like to see the letter that the member alludes to see exactly the content of that letter, and so I will wait to see what will happen on that. This is a process that the Betty Cadwaladr Trust have begun, and it will be complete by July. And what they're trying to do is ensuring that the best possible service is available for their patients, and they are duty-bound to ensure that that happens.
Thank you, First Minister. The next item, therefore, is the business statement.